My name is Jamie Woodson, and I have the great privilege and honor of serving as the president and CEO of SCORE, the State Collaborative on Reforming Education. We are welcoming you today to a SCORE Institute conversation. Essentially, SCORE Institutes are an opportunity to think big about education, the direction of education, and the future of education, not only in our state, but also our nation. We're very excited today to host a candid conversation regarding improving student achievement in Tennessee with Tennessee Governor Bill Haslam and former Governor Jeb Bush, and also, as you all know, he is the chairman and founder of the Foundation for Excellence in Education. I would like to recognize, just to give you all a sense of the diversity in this room, groups of individuals that are here. There are teachers, principals, district leaders, those who are leading in the Department of Education and minding the work in the executive branch. We also have leaders in the philanthropic community and business community in the room with us. And all of the partners, many statewide organizations, leadership teams, or leaders who are here with us to take part in this conversation. We also have a very important group of partners in the process, and those are policymakers here in the room. And if you will allow me, I would ask our members of the Tennessee General Assembly to please stand and be recognized. I can tell you, it takes a great deal, as the gentleman who will be talking today, to put your name on the ballot and serve in your community, and it means a lot to your family. And so we're thrilled that you, First Lady, are here today, the members of the General Assembly, because it is a family service. Also want to make sure to recognize Commissioner of Education Kevin Huffman, who is with us today. Welcome. We're thrilled that you're here. So I have welcomed this wonderful group, recognized very important members of the room, but my job today is to introduce our founder and chairman, Senator Bill Frist. As many of you know, former United States Majority Leader Bill Frist was also he's a retired heart and lung transplant surgeon, but in his work with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation became intimately familiar with how important improved health outcomes are and how related they are to educational attainment. That passion, not only for improving health outcomes, but improving educational attainment, combined with a passion for the state of Tennessee and opportunities in the state, brought him to the realization that an organization like SCORE was important to the state. And so that in 2009 began the founding of this organization, and it's my great privilege to introduce Senator Bill Frist.
Jamie, thank you, and I do want to welcome all of you here for what will be a educational, but also I think energizing conversation with our two governors. Over the last several years, Tennessee has demonstrated, and I use that word with really underscoring it, because it's taken a conscious effort by our legislators, by our executive leadership, by the communities, by the teachers, by the data specialists, all coming together to focus on kids, preparing them for a better future. We've changed the way we think about teaching in order to support and to train and reward effective teaching in our state. We've begun to use data and analytics to meaningfully, not just drive, but meaningfully drive a way to improve student achievement. We've increased accountability for school districts and for schools and for teachers and students. We've initiated innovative efforts to turn around our lowest performing schools. We've made a determined commitment to increasing skills in math and in science and in technology, skills that we know are critical to our future state and national and global economies. And finally, we've dramatically raised our state's academic standards. It's been determined, it's been focused, it's been by all of us working together. This work has resulted in important early signs of progress. And they're early signs. And as I was talking to several of the legislators, it's important that we take those early signs and hug them and snuggle with them and push them forward and have them grow over time. 55,000 more students are proficient or advanced in 3rd to 8th grade math than there were 2 years ago. 38,000 more are proficient or advanced in science. But we've got a whole lot more work to do. Too many of our students still are unprepared for the future when they graduate from high school. But we're making real progress in improving students' lives. These efforts have really projected Tennessee to the forefront of education reform, of improving public education. But before Tennessee became recognized as a national leader in educational reform, Florida was engaged in a very organic way in groundbreaking work to ensure its students were successful at every stage, beginning with kindergarten, even before kindergarten, all the way through and beyond high school. This work has included increasing academic standards, revamping the way the state holds districts and schools accountable, expanding student access to quality educational options, and focusing in a very targeted way on early literacy. Florida's efforts have resulted in significant gains for students. In 1998, Florida students scored at the bottom of the nation in student achievement. Today, more students are reading, writing, and doing math and science on or above grade level. More high school seniors are earning a diploma, and fewer students are dropping out. Florida's 3rd through 10th grade students are outscoring 60 to 70% of their peers in all other states in both reading and math. For our event today, for today's SCORE Institute event, we have 2 high-level objectives. The first is to highlight Florida's work that has led to these dramatic improvements in student achievement. What has Florida done? What are they doing? How did they achieve it? What were the challenges and successes along the way? And our second objective is to reflect on Tennessee's own innovative work to prepare students for success in college and career. How are we doing as a state? What more can be done? What is that future direction? We're honored today to have with us 2 of our nation's leaders in public education. Bill Haslam is the 49th governor of the state of Tennessee. He was elected in 2010 with 65% of the vote, winning 90 of 95 counties and securing the largest victory of any non-incumbent gubernatorial candidate in our state's history. Governor Haslam and his wife, Chrissy, who is with us today, celebrated their 31st wedding anniversary in 2012 and have 3 wonderful children, a daughter-in-law, a son-in-law, and a new grandson. Jeb Bush is the founder and chairman of the board of the Foundation for Excellence in Education. He served as the 43rd governor of Florida from 1999 through 2007. During his 2 terms, Governor Bush championed major reform of education. Florida raised academic standards, required accountability in public schools, and created one of the most ambitious school choice programs in the nation. Under his leadership in the 1990s, the Foundation for Florida's Future joined forces with General Miami Urban League to establish the state's first charter school, Liberty City Charter School, in one of the most underserved parts of Florida in Miami-Dade County. Governor Bush and his wife live in Miami and have 3 grown children. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Governor Bill Haslam and Governor Jeb Bush.
And Governor, I want to set one ground rule for here. So that we don't sound like doctors in an operating room. We won't start with governor and governor. You'll be Jeb and I'll be Bill, and we won't start every sentence with the word governor. Thank you all for being here. I really do look at this as a chance to have a candid, significant conversation. As you can tell, when Senator Frist was talking about Jeb, he is somebody who produced significant results. All of us as governors, I go to any governor's meeting and everybody talks about, I'm going to focus on education. But only a few people, really, if you look through the history of governors, have produced dramatic results. You can look at Governor Hunt in North Carolina several years ago. But if you make the list, Governor Bush is one of the very few people that you'd say produced dramatic results. And so we're honored to have you here today. And let me just start with this. I'm going to start with a question. I usually get asked them, so it's really fun to be the asker. when you come in as a new governor, you get people want you to do all sorts of things. You've seen all the challenges. You have people in your ear, people who have supported you saying, hey, do this, do that. You see all the issues. What made you decide to focus on education? Of all the different things you could do, why was that your primary emphasis?
Well, first of all, it's a joy to be here. I was in this room, I think the kickoff of SCORE, so you've come a long way, baby. You know? A lot more people, all the big dogs in the entire state seem to be here, so I'm honored and humbled to be here to talk about something I'm passionate about. And this passion kind of grew over time. It wasn't something that I mean, education when times are good, education in most states is always the number one issue. When times are bad, other issues take to the forefront because job creation typically is the main thing going on. In the case of Florida, it was an important issue, but I look over the horizon and I see a country that could be a place of abundance of opportunities, or I could see a different path if we don't change how we educate the next generation. That's how, I view it as perhaps the most critical thing going on. And as a candidate, I laid out what I thought we ought to do. So I had the advantage when I was lucky enough to win. I'm not sure I won because of that, but our taxes went up on January 2nd or whatever day it was because President Obama said he was going to do it if he got elected. There is this connection. You say what you want to do when you're running and you have a chance to do it. It gives you some capital to do it. So I laid out a pretty comprehensive agenda, and then I had a chance to do it. And the legislature never gets the credit. When I was governor, I tried hard to give them credit, but it's so hard because everything focuses on the governor. Maybe not here in Tennessee. You're probably more adept at this, but without the legislature, none of the things that we did in Florida were possible. And it required a lot more courage for them to do this because I was all in already. They had to be persuaded, and they got persuaded. And so we went on this journey of comprehensive reform. But everything that you think's important in life in terms of policy world is linked to education. If you want a growing economy, you have to have a K-12 system that yields young people going to college without taking remedial courses. If you want to have anything that's important, the link between healthcare and education, it's the common denominator, really, of a successful life.
So you said you ran on it. Are the things that you ended up doing the things that you said you would do, and are those the things that made the big impact? Talk about what you did that made an impact versus what you might have thought you would do.
I know this will sound really novel, but I actually got to do what I said I was going to do. And we got most of it done to begin with. What I found interesting, and I didn't, there's a lot of things you don't know until you get there, right? I assume you've had that experience, which makes it the best job in the world. But what I quickly found was that policy is like anything. If you stop, voids are created and voids are filled. Atrophy sets in. The people that resist change, and there was a lot of people that resisted change, began to push back. And so what you and Kevin have to do when the legislature passes these meaningful laws is as important as them doing the job, because you're filling the space with faithful execution of this, and that creates the next opportunity. There's always the debate changes, but what we found was that we had a kind of a continual cycle of reform. So the school choice program that we started was a small one, but the next year and the next year after that, we created the largest school choice programs in the country. And that led to thinking about third grade reading, which led to how do we expand opportunities for children in the underperforming schools. So we expanded AP programs. And then we said, oh my God, we just did a no social promotion policy. How can we help teachers teach? Teachers don't know how to teach reading, and we're asking them to make sure that kids are not functionally illiterate in third grade. So we created a culture where we taught teachers how to teach reading by having reading coaches in every elementary school. And then that worked, so we said, why don't we do it in middle school? So it was continually moving forward. I never would have envisioned that when I started with our what was called the A+ plan.
So let me jump ahead then. I think most of us think it's a good thing you can only be governor for 8 years, but assuming, actually probably in Florida, they want you to keep going, they'll be ready for me to be done.
But 66%, that's a TKO. They called the
That
election in September.
That was before they got to know me. But if you'd have stayed, you said there's always something next. If you'd have had more time, what would you have done?
What you're doing right now, and leading, by the way, in the country, I would say, in terms of this complex issue of how do we move away from a tenure-driven teaching system where longevity of breathing, basically showing up and being in there for the you get paid more the longer you serve, rather than connecting student achievement with teacher performance and then paying for that in some fashion. That is a really complex but hugely important element of rising student achievement. We have to pay teachers a lot more when they do extraordinary work, and we have to move away from protecting teachers that are interacting with our kids and doing it in a toxic way. There are not many of teachers that do that. The ones that do, where kids are not getting any learning gains, that's really dangerous, because it's really hard to pick up from a situation where students are learning. So I would say that, and then the other issue, it would be really important today. 45 governors, including you, are going to be implementing Common Core state standards, and these are higher standards. There are fewer of them. They're going to require critical thinking skills, a massive effort to help teachers teach to these standards. Enormous pressure by the legislature and a bunch of other folks to pull back, because if you assess to these standards accurately, a third of Tennessee children or a third of Florida's children are college and or career ready. That's not a pretty thing to have to admit, but those are the facts, and that's going to be a big challenge for a lot of governors. 2014, as you know, is when it's happening.
So let me follow up on that question. A lot of reformers, we say just what you just said. It's all about treating it like a profession, rewarding great teachers, and those few that don't need to be in front of the classroom, making sure we're addressing that and helping the rest to get better. The challenge comes in doing the first piece of that. How do we reward great teachers? You've had a budget you had to manage before, and you realize so much of it's driven by the need to control costs in ways that in a perfect world you wouldn't have to do. So how do we do that? I mean, it's a legitimate complaint for those folks who say, well, you're always talking about, here's how we'll address the teachers that aren't great, but we need to reward the good ones. How do we do that given budget constraints?
That's the great challenge. I believe if you start with the premise that you fund the reforms first, and then you fund everything else second, you would fund the things that you know will yield to rising student achievement. This is all about if you start with the premise that this is about rising student achievement, then effective teachers are the key that is funded. I mean, loving parents, the government doesn't have to, you could wish it, but the government getting involved in that doesn't work really well. So let's assume where the government's role is on creating a cadre of teachers that are highly effective, that is the leading indicator of student achievement. So you fund that first. And then the other things that have crept into K-12 life, and believe me, there are a lot of them, a lot of requirements that school districts have to do that a generation ago they didn't, a lot of interests that may have been brought by a school district or a school board that aren't related to rising student achievement. If you focus on funding the reforms first, then you have the money necessary. It is better. I was governor. I had the luxury of a growing economy when I was governor. It's when you're asking people to, I'll use a Bush analogy, you're asking people to eat broccoli, it's always good to have a little hot cheese sauce that goes along with it or something, or hot sauce. So the extra money is like the cheese for my broccoli that I can't eat, but so it's easier to do it that way. But I think you're finding, in leading this great state, that you've found ways to fund the reforms, right? You do those first.
Fair point. So let me ask, how is your dad? Speaking of broccoli.
He is out of the hospital as of noon today, Central Standard Time. So God willing. I broke this news without meaning to at 8 o'clock on Saturday night giving a speech, and it was all set up for a joke because my dad made this announcement when he got out of ICU that to put the harps back in the closet. That was his statement. He went back to the regular hospital room, and then he was supposed to get out on Monday, and thankfully it happened. And I said, that's good news for all of us, and even good news for my dad. The problem now is he's no longer going to be pampered by all these nurses and healthcare providers in the hospital. Now his caregiver is Barbara Bush. So the minute you say that in the world we're in now, all of a sudden, Jeb Bush says, father leaving. I mean, it was. I went back and read the Twitter feed from my speech, and it's now I'm going to have to call my mom and apologize. I'll have to do it again after this.
Probably not the first time.
No,
right.
That's right.
Let me go to something else that you mentioned in there, Common Core standards. Talk about. I do think a lot of us have made the connection between higher standards and better results.
Right.
So talk about that, and I want you to answer one other question here. As Republicans, what do we think the federal government's role is in setting those higher standards? So kind of a two-question, connection between standards and results, and how do you feel as a Republican governor about the federal government's role in that? I'd
be really nervous if this was a federal government set of standards. I wouldn't be advocating it for sure. That's why I think the terminology and language is important. People hear Common Core standards and they automatically think that these are federalized standards, that somehow the sovereignty of each state is going away. That's why Texas, for example, my native state, is against these standards because, if you've met a Texan, we're Texans, God dang it. We don't want anybody telling us what to do or how to think. And that's a really rich tradition in the state. But these are not federal standards. These are standards that the NGA and the state school officers have come together and said, as a nation, we need to benchmark ourselves to the best in the world. And we need to think anew about how to go about the learning experience, particularly in the case of the Common Core standards, it's math and language arts. And so I'm a conservative. I do believe that the best reforms almost always come from the localities and states. But in this particular case, this should be a national imperative. Imagine the way I would look at it, I guess, is we right now have a multitude of standards that people claim they teach to, but in fact we've diluted the standards. There's so many of them that it's almost impossible for a teacher in a classroom to teach the mandated state standards. So in fact we have close to no standards and we teach one way, and that's an oversimplification. Imagine a system that might have higher, loftier standards with a whole multitude of different ways to teach to them and allow for more innovation, particularly digital learning, which is the third thing I would, that I'm most excited about going forward, where you provide all sorts of different ways because kids are different. Learn differently. We need to move to a more customized, performance-oriented system, and the Common Core state standards, I think, apart from the fact they're higher and tougher, they also allow for that to happen, that you're going to have a lot more innovation, which is necessary. If it's something of a national importance, the federal government doesn't have to be running it. It can be of national importance. And what else? If not this, what? Really, what would shake our complacency if this isn't it? We're telling the next generation your ability to be successful, your ability to rise up, your ability to be successful is so limited today because we're so politically correct and we're not challenging the fact that our standards are way too low. And I think the states that faithfully do this well, like I know you're committed to and Kevin is, are going to be way out in front of the other states that are going to back away.
Well, by the way, in about 5 minutes, I'm going to open up for questions from the audience.
Do I get to ask you any questions?
Yeah, if you'd like. Looking back as governor, what are focusing on education, Senator Frist went through a really good kind of lineup of accomplishments and results. What are the things you did that you think made the most difference in driving those results?
It was the comprehensive nature of what we did that yielded rising student achievement. And look, Florida's got a long way to go. The greatest gains have been in narrowing the achievement gap and in the lower grades. We've seen improvement in middle school, and we're beginning to see in high school, but the significant gains were kids that were cast aside prior that now are treated with the same respect as every child. And that has yielded great gains. But like I said, it's kind of flattened out a little bit in the last few years. And I think some of the Common Core Standards implementation, digital learning, there's the teacher evaluation system that we're trying to implement. All these things will jumpstart student learning again. It's comprehensive. And I would add that school choice is a huge element of this. All forms, digital, public, private, not for profit. Somehow for-profit things are bad now in America. I mean, I don't have any problem with any form if kids are learning more and you can customize the learning experience to their unique situation and parents are empowered, they all benefit. I mean, very few people, there's very little discussion about that. I mean, generally that's accepted. That's pretty American. The argument, though, that somehow traditional public schools do worse when there's choice is the part that I find interesting, because that belies the data that we found in Florida. All schools do better when there's competition, just like this university does better because their parents have choices. They don't have to go to this fantastic school. They can go to others. If this school stops being as fantastic as it is, they're not going to be as successful. So having the empowering part of school choice benefits all, not just the places where the children land. And the experience in Florida has been that is a key element. That's like the catalytic converter. Or to use a truck stop, analogy, that's like the high octane fuel that goes into the truck that makes it go better and faster for the whole system.
Well, I'm tempted to go off on the truck stop analogy, but I won't.
You know something about it.
Yeah, let me ask a question. I'm certain one of the things you heard was what we hear a lot is, this is all great, but it's too much, too fast.
Yeah.
Slow down, too many reforms. Let us get our breath. Let us catch our balance here. I'm curious of your thoughts and your response.
I would say I was intolerant to that. I'm not saying that as a good thing, to be honest with you. This would have been a place. I don't know. I'm so passionate about this, and I'm so frustrated other people don't share my passion to the extent that I do. Does that make sense? I'm very impatient. So I'm impatient by nature, and then when you combine that with this resistance that I found illogical, I just wasn't good at finding the kumbaya moments. And still to this day, I get blamed for all sorts of stuff, like the common cold, breakout of acne because of the state test. I mean, I've been gone I've been gone like 6 years, but it's Bush's fault still, because I didn't do what you do a better job of, and you and Kevin have done a better job of this. And so, in a perfect world, if I had a redo, I would try to convince people of the urgency of the moment, without a doubt, because this is a time of great importance for our country, and this is the single most important thing that we can be doing to assure who we are as a nation continues to be great. In fact, I'd say to reverse the trends we're on, really, it's the big challenge. And so I wouldn't give up my intensity, but I work harder to try to find common ground with people that are just, resist change by nature, and then the velocity of change becomes overwhelming, to try to help them understand how important this is and make them partners. We didn't do that to the extent we could have in Florida. When you guys came to the Hunt Institute event, it was really interesting to hear the work after the pushback on the teacher evaluation effort, where you started hearing that it was too fast, too soon, blah, 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 all the stuff that goes on. And you paused, you listened, you took the time to engage, you persuaded, and now I hope, maybe this is speculation on my part, that there's now greater buy-in, and that this will be implemented in a way that will be a huge win for the state. We could have done a better job on that.
One last question, then I'm going to go to the audience. What do you know now that you wish you'd known 14 years ago when you were first sworn in, relative to education? We'll keep it there.
I would, if I had known the power of digital learning, the ability to take high-quality content and apply adaptive technology, if you will, to truly customize the learning experience. Now, the internet existed when I'm not that old, but there's been massive improvement in content, its delivery, the access issues of broadband, the ability to customize the learning experience, to shift to this customized learning experience that's competency-based. I mean, ultimately, leaders ought to, in the public and private sectors, they ought to say, what should it look like, 5 years from now?
Right.
So 10 years ago, I would have never envisioned this potential happening 5 years from now. But now I'm absolutely convinced it would, and I would have done some things before all the threats and all the concerns to maybe create a more fertile ground for it to happen, where you end up with a learning environment that is not like one system or another system or another system. It's truly child-centered. So imagine a school, we would eliminate social promotion in this regard because kids wouldn't be passed along until they learned what they were supposed to. And if they did learn it, they wouldn't be held back. So you could have a cadre of 10-year-olds that go through the learning experience. By the time they finish, when they're 17, they could be 2 years into college, or they could be graduating, but we'd have a lot more kids graduating because they would not move on to the next subject matter until they completed the last one. And we wouldn't have a teacher being forced to kind of teach to the median. So you got 25 kids, the poor teacher has to pick, we're going to pick the slower learning kids, or am I going to worry about the faster learning kids, or am I going to teach right to the middle? Now with technology, that can be dramatically changed. And to me, it offers the greatest excitement. And had I anticipated this power cascading into our lives, as it has in the last few years, I would change the laws before it became debatable. And I would encourage Tennessee to do the same.
All right, we're going to go to the audience now. There's 2 rules on the questions. Your question has to take less than 15 seconds, because I want to get as many as possible. And second, it has to be a question.
Can you do this? Can you do this at a press conference?
No, I have a 100% failure rate there.
That would have been fun to be able to create rules like that on the press.
Yeah, doesn't work there. I'm going to let Kevin ask the first one, and then, like I said, I'll open up to whoever would like to.
Great. Governor, thanks for coming. Can you delineate some of the choice programs that you implemented in Florida and talk about where the biggest pushback came from?
The first choice program is called Opportunity Scholarships. That name's been stolen by a few other states. It was tied to failing schools that were graded F, were given 2 years out of 4 or 5, I guess, parents were given vouchers in those schools. That was the first program. It was the smallest program. It was the one most directly related, though, to putting pressure on the lower performing schools to improve, and has had a dramatic impact. It was ruled unconstitutional, but prior to that, the schools that were on the bubble for if they didn't improve the next year had significantly better results than after the voucher program was ruled unconstitutional when there wasn't a consequence. In other words, the F schools post not having the private voucher part, there was very little change, but prior to that, people said, oh my gosh, we got to do something different. Kids are going to leave, and in fact they did show improvement. So that was the first one. The second program was the McKay Scholarship Program, which effectively is for all we call them ESE kids, these exceptional ed children, learning disabled, physically disabled, children with mental challenges, the whole wide array of students that are classified in that regard. If their IEA is not being, if their individual education plan, whatever that is, IEP, is not being met, a parent can unilaterally send their child dollar for dollar funded to a school of their choice, public or private. And that's about 22,000 kids. And then the next year, the Corporate Tax Scholarship Program that John Kirtley runs is the largest of its kind at 50,000 kids. It's means tested for income. It's been incredibly popular, and that program's been in existence since 2001. We now have a universal pre-K program that's for all 4-year-olds, half-day program funded by the state, $150 50,000 more or less kids take public monies to go to private options there, a majority of which are religious private options for 4-year-olds, and then the minute they go to kindergarten, somehow that's evil. It's an interesting part of our constitutional makeup in our state. And then finally, we have the Florida Virtual School, which administers 500,000 courses, and homeschool kids and private families, private school kids can receive learning through the Florida Virtual School on the state dime. So it's a pretty broad suite of reforms, and all the while we've had the greatest learning gains in the country.
Who runs the Florida Virtual School?
It's a state. It's run by the state. It's run by Julie Young, basically. It's run by a woman who, it was a state I don't know what the government. It's a state of Florida entity that is independent. There's some term for that. It's like a direct support organization. It's not. But we also have the private providers as well that have expanded dramatically in the state, which we are grateful for as well. So we have many. We have the hybrid forms. We have the brick and mortar, digital learning, and we have the online, pure online, delivered by a variety of different sources.
Okay, let's see. We'll work a microphone back that way to you.
World better because of choices. Radical idea. Go to the supermarket and check out the milk section for the guys that outsource that to their spouses. You'll find the world has actually changed, that we have 35 different versions of milk, and we're better for it, and so would schools if parents were given that kind of power.
For Jeb, can you talk about the charter school movement in Florida and your thoughts on a statewide authorizer?
Sure. We had our charter school law was passed in '97. It's a good one, maybe not the best, but it's a good one. One of the things we don't have is a statewide authorizer. So if districts reject a charter school application, which is their right, and in many cases the applicants are deserving of that, they appeal to the State Board of Education, which can remand back to the district, similar to what you have here, I think, now. And we've had bad behaving districts that do this, go beyond what the intent of what their discretion is, to basically, they don't want charter schools, period. You could bring Mother Teresa charter school with Mother Teresa herself, and they would find a reason why that would be a bad thing. So the statewide authorizer bill, we had one. This will sound like a little bit of a constant refrain. It was ruled unconstitutional in our state. It was not worded probably the best possible way, but the fact is that had we had one, my guess is it would be seldom used because districts would authorize more charter schools that were deserving of that. It basically would be, I think, used as a tool to bring about a better behaved school district that is is complying with the law that you have. And I would encourage that here. All these things seem so provocative and scary, because you don't have them maybe. And I always found whatever the thing, not just education, but in general, if something was controversial and it passed and you implement it the right way, all of a sudden people say, well, the world didn't come to an end. I guess we can move on to the next thing we're going to be mad about. And this would be one of those. This is not earth-shattering. I think it would be a very effective tool to bring high-quality charter schools into communities where the district, where the school board itself is becoming, where they're reactionary, basically. I mean, these people are reactionary, and they shouldn't be. They should embrace change. A charter school in a city is a public school in that city. When they have success, school districts should embrace that success because it's their success. Never quite gotten. I miss some of the things that we fight about. This is really one that doesn't make sense to me.
Yes. Try to get a microphone back to you.
Good afternoon. My name is Ruth Woodall, and I'm with the Tennessee Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And our ultimate goal is workforce development. So I would like for you to elaborate a bit on the role of business in improving education and some of the best practices that if you could share with us. Thank you.
Well, starting with politics, businesses normally have political agendas to build a better business climate. Chambers of Commerce do that, your industry groups, and one of the things that we did that hadn't been the case prior was to get the business community and all of its forums to be focused on K-12 reform as a business climate issue. And it was very helpful, very helpful. Traditionally, at least my experience is that the business community focuses a lot on higher ed because there's a direct link there to workforce development and not as much on K-12. In Florida, that's no longer the case, and it's been quite helpful to convince reluctant, wayward legislators to go along. So on that side, it's important. And I would say the second thing that's where businesses can play a huge role is in partnering with these varying forms of education that are beginning to, take hold, as well as the traditional schools, to make the learning more relevant. I think one of the challenges in our country, and Florida is not the leader in this regard, and I hope it begins to aspire to that, is a lot of kids get bored to tears. The learning experience in 10th grade, they got a lot of other issues going on. They got to make their car payments, they're working, they're not it's not necessarily something that they think is of meaning and purpose. If it was more career oriented, where they could see a direct link to their work, to something to an avocation that they have, to an interest they have, to making learning more dynamic, where it actually has appeal. And this is what online learning can do more of, because it offers a more customizable, if you will, experience. Then I think you could envision school being a lot more interesting and kids staying longer. And businesses could play a huge role in that regard. There are states, and I'm sure Tennessee's one of them, that has worked hard to connect the learning experience and a more career-oriented education. I think all communities could do a lot better, though, in that regard.
Yeah, Mark, let's see. We'll get you a microphone real quick.
How intense was the original opposition to the reform, and has there been significant buy-in now that it's been implemented?
There was a huge fight. Huge fight. I mean, it was, you probably can't see the tire marks on my forehead anymore. It was a big deal. It was a big fight, and we won. I'd say the unions have been opposed to every one of the Florida reforms. But others that were the school boards, perhaps, the superintendents, certainly the PTA, other groups that were opposed initially, their opposition has subsided. And the business community that was neutral became active. So we took people, this is politics 101, your opponents you want to neutralize and your potential supporters you want to activate, right? I mean, you want to move down that spectrum where your support is mobilized, and that's what we found. But to this day, the teacher evaluation system in Florida has got big controversy attached to it. Moving to digital learning, to the extent that the legislature looks at that, there's concerns about that. Different groups, but what is clear is that if you don't start on the journey of reform, the voucher programs are not the debate anymore. A majority of African American legislators support the corporate tax scholarship program. In the beginning, none did. My re-election, the teachers union mortgaged their building to support my opponent, which I took as a gesture. They didn't like my policies much. So all the way through, there was opposition to this. This was not all easy. Big stuff seldom is. That's the fun part, though. I mean, I found the passing of the bill to make the orange, the official state fruit or something like that. That was cute. It was a middle school class that did it. They got the bill done, and they learned, it was a civics lesson. They got it done, and I went to the school and signed the bill. That's not why I wanted to be governor. It was just a nice thing. But the things that are important really do require, frankly, if it isn't controversial or hard to do, you probably needed to add a few more bales of hay on the truck. Bigger is better. And the other thing that I found, and this is back to the legislative process because those are ultimately the partners in all this, is that it's a lot more fulfilling to be focused on the big things rather than if you have a legislature that is focused on pleasing the people that are there all the time, you're going to be worried about tweaking the workers' comp bill, or
Careful.
I said tweak it. No, reform it.
Hey, you quit preaching and gone to meddling.
Reform it so you cut the premiums by 50%.
Okay.
Don't let the left-handed Albanian caucus, get in so that they get some free deal, that a judge, whatever. I mean, there's all sorts of little things that you could focus on. I found if there's a bigger focus on the big things, the little things don't get time for that, which makes the world a safer place.
Yeah. We have a question over here, and then yeah.
Good afternoon, Governor Haslam, Governor Bush. My name is Patricia Stokes. I'm with the Urban League of Middle Tennessee.
Sweet.
And I know you know T. Willard, my colleague in Florida.
Brother from another mother.
Brother from another mother, that's right. My question relates to the gap closure that you realized in Florida and the specific strategies that you felt were most effective in helping to make that accomplishment.
So we didn't close the gap, but the gap has been narrowed. And I would say, rewind back to the initial conversation. School choice had an element to this. Robust accountability, where there was a different consequence between improvement and mediocrity or failure, that we rewarded. Our grading system, by the way, a school that was graded A or showed improvement got $100 more per student, direct, right to the school, wire transferred in. And schools that schools that are F graded in Florida have to be transformed in some fashion now. It used to be that they would be given a voucher, but parents can still go to a public school alternative if their school is failing. So choice matters. And once we had the robust accountability of grading schools A, B, C, D, and F, and there was you can't hide away A's better than F. Everybody understood that. Strategies quickly began to be developed, particularly in the literacy side of this. So we took our federal money that Senator Frist was kind enough to appropriate, the Reading First dollars, and we trained we put reading coaches, and we matched it with state money. We put reading coaches in every elementary school, starting with Title I schools, but across the state at one point, every middle school and elementary school had a coach who was a part-time teacher, but also spent full-time teaching teachers how to teach reading. You wouldn't think that's necessary, but trust me, it is. It's a science. Our schools of education, at least in Florida, I won't disparage the great universities of Tennessee, didn't deliver high-quality teachers prepared. They were great people, they just weren't prepared to teach. They knew the history of teaching, history of education, they just couldn't get in front of a classroom and know how to motivate kids that were struggling readers. So we focused on that, and then we expanded opportunities when you have good data, you can make adjustments. So we found that our D and F schools weren't preparing high school sophomores by giving them the practice SAT. The dreaded practice SAT that all middle class and upper middle income families, kids hate. They weren't administered to the lower income communities. I guess the feeling was that lower income kids aren't going to college. If you start with that premise, it's pretty well guaranteed that that'll be the result. So we funded every high school in the state of Florida all kids take the practice SAT. So now the drudgery that every child in upper middle class America has to do, now lower income kids can complain about it too. So they can take the practice SAT with everybody else. We expanded AP programs dramatically, exponentially. So it's a combination of things, but at the end of the day, when you're a D or an F, it's nothing to brag about. And everybody in those districts began to realize that they could move the needle on learning. And when they saw it, they began to be excited about it. How could you not be excited having dramatic learning gains and seeing the rewards of a school in inner city Miami be an go from an F to an A because a new principal came in, created a new strategy for learning, and kids responded. It works.
I have a bunch of hands, and I'm also gotten a signal that we're supposed to wrap up. Let me ask you, and I apologize because there's several of you who have a question, and I'll try to get that answered later. But let me ask one last question, then I'm going to ask Senator Frist to come up and close us. The thing, and realizing we're out of time, and you're the one that has to go catch a plane, so the thing that we can do to talk that sharp 19-year-old who's thinking about what do you want to do with what do they want to do with their life, we can do to talk them into teaching.
Well, I think the schools of education need to be a lot more relevant and exciting than they are today. I'll only speak to Florida. I don't want to cast aspersions again on Tennessee schools. And then open up the teaching profession to a much broader universe of people. The idea that we have alternative certified teachers implies that somehow there's something weird about it, I guess. Well, in Florida, there are more alternative certified teachers than certified teachers. Why, going to a school of education isn't necessarily the path to being a successful teacher. The data suggests that. So, opening up the system so that you can have career choices in the middle of your career to move into teaching, expand Teach for America programs, and all the other things that exist that I hope you all are doing here to make the system of make it a profession, and then pay for successful transfer of teaching to learning, which is what this should be about. Pay a lot more for teachers that are doing great work, and I would argue fail for teachers that aren't doing that. Get them out of the classroom as quickly as possible after you've remediated and it hadn't worked.
Well, Governor, thank you very much. It's been a fascinating conversation.
Thank you.
We're very grateful for
Thank
your
you,
time.
Governor, for your great work.
Governor Bush, Governor Haslam, thank you both very much for being with us today. As we close today's SCORE Institute, I would again like to thank each of you in the room. As Governor Bush mentioned, it was a little over 2.5 years ago that we started SCORE, and the SCORE Institute places discussions like this on the forefront of common sense reform, common sense progress in lifting every child up so that they're ready for the workplace and for education. It simply could not be done without the sort of rooms like this with each of you here who contributed in your own way. Regardless of what party you are, where you are on the political spectrum, we all care about kids, and for that I thank you. I thank you for the work you're doing right now and for being engaged in events like that here at the SCORE Institute. Thank you for what I know will continue to be a major initiative for this community, this state in the future to ensure that every Tennessee student graduates high school prepared for college and a career. With that, thank you very much, and let's give one more round of applause and appreciation for Governor Haslam and Governor Bush. Thank you. Thank you for being with us. That brings our event to a close. Thank you.